All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the final days of Jesus of Nazareth. Now, this is a story most of us feel like we know inside and out, right? But when you really start to peel back the layers, it's this incredible historical and, scientific enigma. A puzzle that kicks off with a betrayal and finishes with, well, an empty tomb.
So let's just dive right in, shall we? You see, the story of the Passion, it's not this one single straightforward narrative, not at all. Think of it more like a giant puzzle, pieced together from Gospels that sometimes contradict each other, from historical records that are hotly debated, and even from modern scientific analysis. It's just packed with these fascinating contradictions and mysteries that scholars are still trying to figure out today. Okay, so where do we even begin this investigation? Well, we have to start with one of history's most infamous characters. The man at the dead center of the betrayal, Judas Iscariot. And right off the bat, we ran smack into a huge contradiction. The Bible itself gives two totally different, completely conflicting accounts of how Judas died. On the one hand, Matthew's gospel says he hanged himself. Simple enough. But then you look at the Acts of the Apostles, and it describes this gruesome fall where his body literally burst open. So which one is it? This is the first really big, confusing piece of the puzzle we've got to look at.
And, the why he did it is just as murky as the how he died. So what was his motive? Was it really just simple greed? The 30 pieces of silver? Or was he just a pawn in some bigger, supernatural game, like when the Gospels say Satan entered into him? And then there's this other theory from scholars. What if he wasn't so much a real person, but more of a character, a literary device, the villain you absolutely need to make the story work? But there's a really powerful counter-argument to that last idea. A scholar named Vittorio Messeri makes this fantastic point. He says that for the early Christians to just invent a character like Judas, well, that would be an act of, in his words, masochism. Think about it. Why would you invent a traitor from Jesus' own handpicked inner circle? A choice that makes people question Jesus' own judgment, right? And it's that very awkwardness, Messeri argues, that actually suggests Judas was a real, historical problem they had to deal with and explain, not just some convenient character they made up.
All right, from Judas, let's move on to the trial. And believe me, this thing is an absolute legal labyrinth. It's all tangled up with conflicting jurisdictions, different charges, and confusing procedures. Let's try to untangle it.
So here's the thing you have to understand. Jesus didn't just have one trial. He basically had two. First, he's in front of the Sanhedrin, that's the Jewish High Council, and there the charge is religious, blasphemy. But then he's hauled in front of the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, and the charge is completely different. Now it's political, sedition, claiming to be a king, which is a direct challenge to Rome. This split really tells you everything about the massive political tension of that time.
And this is where the historical puzzle gets even deeper. The way the Gospels describe the Jewish trial, well, it seems to break a whole bunch of its own rules. The Sanhedrin apparently met at night during a major festival, and then they handed down a death sentence. According to historians, every single one of those things was legally forbidden. So you have to ask, how accurate is the description of these events?
And this leads us to another huge conflict in the story. In the Gospels, you often get this picture of Pontius Pilate as this hesitant guy, wringing his hands, almost looking for a way out of condemning Jesus. But the historical records, they paint a completely different picture. As author Riccardo Calamani puts it, the real Pilate was a ruthless, even sanguinary dictator who did whatever was best for him politically. This was not a man who would hesitate for a second to execute someone he saw as a threat. The two portraits just don't match up.
Okay, so we've looked at the legal maze. Now let's switch gears completely and turn to science, to forensics, to look at the actual physical reality of the crucifixion.
So first up, a little fact that might surprise you because it goes against centuries of tradition. Based on the best historical timelines we have, Jesus probably wasn't 33 when he died. He was more like 37. So what actually happens to a human body during crucifixion? What's the scientific cause of death? For centuries, medical experts have been debating this. It's easy to just say, suffering, but forensic science wants to know the precise physiological reason.
Well, for a long time, the main theories were things like asphyxia, basically not being able to breathe, or something called orthostatic collapse, where all your blood pools in your legs. And those were definitely factors. But a lot of modern forensic experts, like Pierluigi Baima-Bologna, have concluded that the final ultimate cause was cardiac arrest. Just think about it. The combination of all that brutal trauma, the dehydration, the blood loss, the incredible stress,
It would have all led to catastrophic heart failure.
Okay, now we get to one of the most dramatic, almost cinematic moments in the entire story. The Gospels describe this mysterious 3-hour darkness that just fell over the land from noon until 3 in the afternoon, right at the moment Jesus was dying.
So naturally, scientists have tried to find a natural explanation for this. Could it have been a solar eclipse? Well, no, that's actually astronomically impossible. See, Passover always happens during a full moon, and you can only get a solar eclipse during a new moon. The math just doesn't work. Okay, so what about a really bad sandstorm, what they call a Khamsin? Well, maybe. It's possible. But as one astrophysicist points out, those storms were pretty common. Seasoned Roman soldiers would have seen them before. They probably wouldn't have thought it was some kind of huge supernatural sign. So at the end of the day, science doesn't really have an easy answer for this one. And all of this leads us to the final and maybe the biggest enigma of them all. This is the intellectual and, for many, the spiritual climax of the entire story, the empty tomb.
You know, just like with the Judas problem, we find another one of those details here that just seems totally counterintuitive if you were making this story up from scratch. Who were the very first witnesses to the empty tomb? They were women. And in the first century world, the testimony of women was legally inadmissible. It didn't count in court, Jewish or Roman. So think about it. Why on earth would you base the single most explosive claim in your entire story on witnesses that your own culture would immediately dismiss? For a lot of people, that strange, almost unstrategic choice is actually a really powerful argument that the story is true.
But here's a really interesting twist. For the disciple John, belief didn't come just from seeing an empty space. No, what triggered it, according to his gospel, wasn't the missing body. It was the incredibly peculiar way the burial cloths were just left behind.
What John describes is a truly bizarre scene. The linen strips that were wrapped around the body, they weren't just thrown in a heap, like you'd expect if grave robbers had been there. They were lying flat, almost as if the body had somehow just passed right through them. And then, even stranger, the cloth that had been over the face, it wasn't with the other wrappings. It was off to the side, still rolled up, set in a place by itself. It's this weirdly ordered, physically inexplicable scene that the gospel says is the thing that finally sparked belief.
And this, really, is where we have to leave it. The story of the Passion pushes us right up to the absolute edge of what historical analysis can do. It gives us evidence we can scrutinize, contradictions we can debate for hours, and then, finally, it presents a set of claims that science and history just can't fully prove or disprove. And that leaves us all with a final question. When the historical evidence runs out, what are you left with? An unsolved problem or an act of faith?